Come with me. A mountain man saw a little girl sleeping at the station. What he did the next day would change everything. The camera sweeps across a lonely depot at night. Lamplight flickers. Wind rattles the windows. On a bench, a barefoot child sleeps, shivering in the cold. A rugged man steps from the shadows. He should keep walking. Instead, he bends down and whispers, "Come with me." What begins as a single act of mercy soon collides with something far greater. This little girl isn't just abandoned, she's the heir to land and water that powerful men will do anything to steal. Thunder of hooves. A church bell tolling. A door kicked in at midnight. The mountain man, bloodied but unbroken, rises to fight not with bullets, but with truth. But in a world ruled by greed and fear, can kindness and faith hold back the railroad's iron hand? And when the fate of a child rests on one man's courage, what will he risk to protect her? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now and if this story speaks to you. Make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Bitter December wind cut through Ephraim's wool coat as he stood on the depot platform, his weathered hands gripping the supplies he'd just purchased. The Denver and Rio Grande train that had brought him here whistled mournfully as it pulled away, leaving behind swirls of snow and steam in the gathering dusk. He should have been heading straight back to his mountain shack. The temperature was dropping fast, and nightfall would make the trail treacherous. Instead, his boots carried him back inside the station house. Drawn by the small figure he'd noticed earlier, the oil lamps cast weak yellow light across the wooden benches. There she lay, no bigger than a sack of grain curled up against the cold. Her feet were bare despite the bitter weather, and the coat that covered her thin frame was more patches than cloth. A bundle made from what looked like a faded quilt was clutched tight against her chest. Even in sleep, the station master's boots clomped across the plank floor. "Sad business," he muttered, keeping his voice low. "Been here 2 nights now, poor thing. Mother took sick on the train west. Didn't make it past Trinidad." He shook his head. "Name's Nora May, according to the pastor who saw to her mama's burial. Ain't got no other kin we know of." Ephraim's throat tightened. He thought of his own empty cabin, the silence that had filled it since Sarah passed. 2 nights, you say? Yep. Gave her what bread we could spare. But the station master trailed off with a helpless shrug. Ephraim set his supplies down and pulled off his thick leather gloves. The girl's face was peaceful in sleep, but her cheeks were hollow and dark smudges lay under her eyes. His calloused hand hesitated, then gently touched her shoulder. "Child," he said softly, "wake up now." Her eyes fluttered open, big brown eyes full of fear and confusion. She clutched her bundle tighter and tried to shrink away from his touch. "It's all right," Ephraim said, keeping his voice low and steady like he would with a spooked horse. "My name's Ephraim Boone. I've got a warm place up in the mountains." He paused, searching for the right words. "Would you come with me? Get you something hot to eat?" Nora May stared at him, then glanced at the station master, who gave a slight nod. Her small voice quavered. "Mama said not to go with strangers." "Your mama was right to tell you that," Ephraim agreed. "But sometimes the good Lord puts strangers in our path when we need help the most." He didn't know where those words came from. He hadn't spoken of the Lord since Sarah died. The girl's eyes welled with tears. "Mama's gone to heaven," she whispered. "I know," Ephraim swallowed hard. "I'm right. Sorry about that." A tear rolled down her cheek, but she sat up straighter, clutching her bundle. Will there be a fire?" "Where you live? Yes, indeed. And I've got some warm blankets, too." He held out his hand, rough and weathered against her small one. "Come with me." After a long moment, she placed her tiny hand in his. Ephraim nodded to the station master, gathered his supplies, and led Nora outside. The wind had picked up, driving icy needles of snow. Without hesitation, he shrugged off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. His mule, Jasper, stood patiently at the hitching post, steam rising from his flanks. Ephraim secured his supplies, then turned to Nora. "Ever rode a mule before?" She shook her head, eyes wide. "Well then, up you go." He lifted her carefully, settling her in front of the saddle. She was light as a feather, barely weighing more than his sack of flour. The bundle she carried made a soft, clinking sound, perhaps her mother's few possessions. Ephraim swung up behind her, gathering the reins in one hand while keeping the other arm secure around her small frame. Above them, the first stars were appearing in the deep blue of dusk. "It's a fair piece up the mountain," he told her as Jasper's hooves clip-clopped away from the station. "You just lean back against me if you get tired." Already he could feel her shivering less in the shelter of his body. As they left the town behind, heading toward the looming shadows of the mountains, Nora May's head gradually nodded forward. Soon her breathing deepened into the rhythm of sleep. Ephraim gazed down at the child's dark hair, feeling the trust she'd placed in him like a physical weight on his heart. What did he know about caring for a little girl? But he couldn't have left her there, alone, on that bench. Some things a man just couldn't abide. The stars brightened overhead as they climbed the familiar trail. Jasper picking his way surely through the gathering darkness. Each step carried them further from the world below and closer to his solitary cabin, though perhaps, Ephraim thought, it wouldn't be so solitary anymore. Gray light crept over the mountain peaks as Ephraim guided his mule along the final stretch of trail. The path wound through stands of pine, their branches heavy with fresh snow. His cabin perched ahead on a small clearing, looking lonesome against the pale dawn sky. Nora May hadn't made a sound during the long night ride. Though he'd felt her shivering despite being wrapped in his thick wool blanket, her small hands still clutched that ragged bundle. Held tight against her chest even in sleep, Jasper's hooves crunched through the crusty snow as they approached the cabin. Ephraim dismounted carefully, keeping one hand steady on Nora's back. She stirred, blinking at the unfamiliar surroundings with wide eyes. "This here's home," Ephraim said, lifting her down. Her bare feet wouldn't do in the snow, so he carried her to the cabin door. Inside, the air was cold enough to show their breath. "Let's get some warmth in here, first thing." He settled Nora on a rough-hewn chair, wrapping his blanket more securely around her shoulders. The wood stove stood cold and dark in the corner. Ephraim's fingers, stiff from the night ride, fumbled with kindling and matches. Soon the dry pine caught, and warmth began seeping into the small space. While the cabin heated, he unpacked his supplies and set a pot of beans to cook. The girl watched his every move, silent as a shadow. Her eyes followed him as he moved about the cabin, taking in the sparse furnishings, the plank table, the shelves lined with preserved food, the stack of furs in the corner. When the beans were ready, he filled a tin bowl and set it before her with a spoon. "Eat up now. Been a long spell since your last proper meal, I reckon." She needed no second invitation. The spoon trembled in her small hand as she scooped up the steaming beans. Ephraim had to stop himself from telling her to slow down. He recognized the desperate hunger in the way she wolfed down the food while she ate. He tried to maintain his distance, busying himself with tasks around the cabin. But his eyes kept straying to the tiny figure at his table. What was he thinking? Bringing a child up here. He'd have to take her to town tomorrow, find proper folk to care for her. "Thank you, sir," came a whisper when the bowl was empty. "I'm Nora May," Ephraim nodded, throat tight. "I know. The station master told me he found an old cot stored against the wall and set it up in the corner furthest from his own bed. Sarah's quilt, the one he couldn't bear to look at most days, would keep the child warm enough." The short winter day faded quickly. As dusk gathered outside the cabin windows, Nora's soft voice rose in the dimness. The hymn was one Ephraim recognized, "Sweet By and By," though he hadn't heard it since Sarah's passing. The girl's clear notes filled the cabin, stirring dust motes in the lamplight. "Mama taught me that one," Nora said, when the last note faded. She said singing makes the angels smile. Singing makes the angels smile. Ephraim turned away, busying himself with the stove. Sarah used to sing that very hymn while working in their kitchen before the fever took her. The cabin had been silent since then, nothing but the wind and his own breathing for company. Now this child's voice had brought something alive in the space again, something he'd thought was gone forever. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. A storm was moving in across the peaks. Ephraim added wood to the stove and helped Nora settle onto the cot, tucking Sarah's quilt around her small frame. She still wouldn't let go of that bundle she'd carried from the station. "Sleep now," he said gruffly. "Tomorrow we'll figure things out." He sat in his chair by the fire long after Nora's breathing had deepened into sleep. The storm grew stronger, wind howling around the cabin corners like a live thing. But inside, the space felt different than it had just a day ago. Warmer somehow, despite the weather. His eyes kept moving to the sleeping child. He'd taken her to spare her another cold night on that station bench, nothing more. Come morning, he'd ride her down to town, find the orphanage. It was the sensible thing to do. He was a lone mountain man, no fit guardian for a little girl, but watching her there, peaceful under Sarah's quilt, that resolve felt less certain with each passing hour. The thought of returning to his silent cabin, empty but for memories, sat heavy in his chest. The fire crackled low in the stove. Outside, snow continued to fall, wrapping the cabin in white silence. Ephraim added another log and settled back in his chair. Knowing sleep would be long in coming, this night morning brought clear skies and deep snow. Ephraim rose early, his joints stiff from sleeping in the chair. Nora was already awake, perched on the edge of her cot with her bundle clutched close. "Best get moving before the snow settles more," Ephraim said, stirring the coals in the stove. He fixed a quick breakfast of cornmeal mush sweetened with molasses. Nora ate quietly, her eyes following him as he gathered supplies for the journey. Outside, Jasper stamped in the fresh powder, his breath steaming in the cold air. Ephraim wrapped Nora in both blankets before lifting her onto the mule's broad back. He'd found an old pair of Sarah's wool stockings that morning and pulled them up over Nora's bare feet, tucking them into her thin shoes. The trail down the mountain was treacherous with snow. Jasper picked his way carefully while Ephraim walked alongside, leading the mule by the reins. The going was slow, each step requiring careful placement. By mid-afternoon, they finally reached the outskirts of town. The county orphan home stood apart from other buildings, a severe brick structure with narrow windows crossed by iron bars. Dead vines clung to the walls like grasping fingers. Even the snow seemed grayer here. Ephraim lifted Nora down, noting how she pressed closer to his side as they approached the heavy wooden door. A brass bell hung beside it, its ring echoing hollowly inside. The matron who opened the door was as stark as the building, tall and angular, with steel-gray hair pulled tight beneath a spotless cap. Her eyes swept over them coldly. "Yes," she demanded, blocking the entrance. "Got a child here needs looking after," Ephraim said, his voice gruff. "Found her at the train station a couple days back," the matron's gaze fixed on Nora, who shrank further behind Ephraim's leg. "Another one? Is it? Well, come in then. Mind you, wipe those boots." Inside, the air was chill despite a meager fire in the grate. Children in threadbare clothes huddled on wooden benches, none speaking above whispers. A boy, no older than 8, struggled past with a heavy water bucket, some splashing onto the floor. The matron's hand whipped out, catching the boy hard across the face. "Clumsy fool. Clean that up before it stains." Ephraim's jaw tightened as the boy scrambled to mop up the spill with his sleeve, tears streaming silently down his cheeks. "Now then," the matron turned back to them, her tone businesslike. "The girl's name?" "Nora May," Ephraim answered. Feeling Nora's small fingers grip his coat, the matron's eyes narrowed on the bundle Nora carried. "And what's she got there?" "We don't allow personal items, breeds attachment and jealousy among the others. Just some things of her mother's," Ephraim said. "Hand it here, girl. We'll find use for whatever's worth keeping." The matron reached for the bundle. But Nora jerked back, a small cry escaping her. She whispered, "Please, it's all I have of Mama." The matron's face hardened. Defiance will not be tolerated here. Children must learn their place. She advanced, hands outstretched, something twisted in Ephraim's gut, the same feeling he'd had seeing Nora, alone on that station bench. Without conscious thought, he stepped between them, gathering Nora into his arms. "Changed my mind," he said flatly. "She ain't staying here." The matron drew herself up, lips thin with anger. "I see another troublemaker. Unwilling to respect proper authority. Very well, take her. But don't come crying back when you tire of playing guardian to a willful child." Ephraim was already striding toward the door. Nora held tight against his chest. The boy with the water bucket watched them go. Hope and despair mingled in his eyes. Outside, Ephraim settled Nora on Jasper's back, tucking the blankets close around her. The sun was sinking behind the mountains as they started the long ride home. They traveled in silence through deepening dusk, the mule's hooves breaking fresh trails in the snow. Stars were beginning to shine by the time they reached the cabin, its dark windows warming to life as Ephraim lit the lamps and stoked the stove. Later, with a pot of beans warming and Nora settled on her cot, she spoke so softly he almost missed the words. "Thank you for not leaving me there." Ephraim nodded. unable to speak past the tightness in his throat. What had he done? He was no fit guardian for a child, a solitary mountain man with nothing to offer but a cramped cabin and simple fare. But the memory of that boy's stricken face, the matron's grasping hands, told him he'd made the only choice he could live with. He watched Nora drift asleep, her precious bundle still held close, and wondered what tomorrow would bring. Dawn broke cold and clear over the mountain. Ephraim watched Nora nibble at her breakfast biscuit, knowing they needed more than his bachelor stores could provide. A growing child needed proper food, warm clothes, things he'd never thought to keep on hand. "You'll come with me this time." Nora nodded, carefully folding her mother's shawl around her shoulders. The wool stockings Ephraim had given her still bunched around her ankles, but they were warmer than nothing. The ride to town was easier today, the snow having settled firm. Jasper picked his way down the familiar trail, while Nora sat before Ephraim in the saddle, pointing out chickadees and snow-laden branches that caught her eye. Main Street was busy when they arrived, wagons creaking through the slush, townspeople hurrying about their morning business. Heads turned as Ephraim lifted Nora down. He heard the whispers start immediately. "Ain't that the mountain man? Ephraim Boone. What's he doing with a child? That hermit?" Ephraim set his jaw and guided Nora toward Miller's General Store, the bell jingling as they entered. The warm interior smelled of coffee and leather. Barrels of dried goods lined up against the walls. Mrs. Miller looked up from her counter, eyes widening at the sight of them. "Well now," she said. "This is unexpected." Ephraim pulled out his list. "Need some things? Growing girl needs proper food." More whispers rose from the corner where two women were examining calico. One laughed behind her hand, while the other frowned disapprovingly. Ephraim kept his eyes on his list as Mrs. Miller gathered their supplies. Flour, sugar, dried fruit, a tin of hard candy that made Nora's eyes light up. "Might want to add some fabric," Mrs. Miller suggested gently. "Child needs more than one dress." Ephraim nodded gruffly, letting her add yards of sturdy cotton to the pile. He was counting out coins when the store's bell jangled again. A well-dressed man entered, his boots polished to a shine that seemed out of place in the muddy street. He carried a leather portfolio under one arm and wore the confident smile of someone used to getting his way. The man approached, extending his hand. "Silas Morton, agent for the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad. Might I have a word?" Ephraim ignored the offered hand. "Busy here." "It concerns the child," Morton said smoothly, glancing at Nora. "Or more specifically, her inheritance." Ephraim stilled. Mrs. Miller busied herself with straightening shelves, but he could tell she was listening. Morton pulled papers from his portfolio. The late Mrs. May filed a land claim before her death. Quite valuable property up in the valley, includes water rights that several parties are interested in. As the child's heir, he smiled at Nora, who pressed closer to Ephraim's side. "Well, naturally, the railroad wants to ensure everything is properly settled." "Ain't nothing to settle," Ephraim said flatly. On the contrary, Morton's smile didn't waver. Without a legally recognized guardian, the child's claim could be contested. Ranchers are already asking questions. The railroad could help protect her interests for appropriate considerations. Of course, Ephraim looked down at Nora's upturned face, seeing now why the orphanage matron had been so eager to claim her. This child wasn't just an orphan. She was a target for those wanting to steal her birthright. "We're done here," he said, gathering their supplies. He took Nora's hand, noting how small it felt in his rough grip. "Consider my offer, Mr. Boone," Morton called after them. "These matters can become quite complicated." The threat in those smooth words followed them out into the street. Ephraim loaded their supplies quickly, lifting Nora onto Jasper's back with extra care. The ride home was silent, his thoughts churning like spring floodwater. That night, after Nora had fallen asleep with her precious bundle clutched close, Ephraim knelt beside his bunk. He couldn't remember the last time he'd prayed, probably at Sarah's graveside. Angry words hurled at a God who'd taken her too soon. But now, watching moonlight fall across Nora's peaceful face, different words came. "Lord," he whispered, voice rough with disuse, "don't rightly know why you sent this child my way. Can't say I deserve such trust. But if you'll grant me strength to protect her, I'll do my best by her. That's all I can offer." The cabin creaked in the night wind, snow tapping against the windows like gentle fingers. Ephraim remained on his knees, searching his heart for the courage this child would need him to find the mountain winter. Settled into a gentle rhythm as days passed in Ephraim's cabin, each morning frost painted delicate patterns on the window panes, and wood smoke curled from the chimney into the crisp air. Nora proved herself helpful despite her small size, carrying kindling while Ephraim swung his axe against larger logs. "Mama always said idle hands make mischief," she told him seriously one morning. Carefully arranging sticks in her apron, Ephraim's lips twitched. "Your mama sounds like she was a wise woman." Their days found a natural pattern. After breakfast, they'd trudge through snow to the creek for water, Nora holding the smaller bucket while Ephraim carried two large ones. She'd sing as they worked, her clear voice floating across the silent landscape. "Jesus loves me. This I know," she'd warble, and sometimes Ephraim found himself humming along. Remembering church songs from his own childhood, evenings brought them close to the fireplace, where Nora would curl up with her mother's worn Bible while Ephraim mended harness or carved wooden animals. Sometimes she'd read fragments of prayers she remembered, teaching them to him with patient determination. "Now I lay me down to sleep," she'd prompt, and wait for him to repeat the words. One Sunday morning, Ephraim surprised himself by saying, "Reckon we ought to go to church." Nora's face lit up. "Really? Like Mama and I used to." They dressed in their best, though Ephraim's Sunday coat was weathered and Nora's dress showed signs of wear. The little white church sat proudly at the edge of town, its bell calling folks to worship inside. Heads turned as Ephraim led Nora to a back pew. Whispers fluttered like leaves, but Nora didn't seem to notice, too busy drinking in the familiar sight of the cross and altar. The organ's notes filled the small space, and Ephraim watched as Nora sang every hymn by heart, her face glowing with joy. While folks mingled outside in the weak winter sunshine, a woman approached them. She wore a neat blue dress and carried herself with quiet confidence. "Welcome," she said warmly. "I'm Hannah Lindstrom, the school teacher." She knelt to Nora's level. "And who might you be, young lady?" "Nora May," came the shy response, though she smiled at Hannah's gentle manner. "I hear you're staying with Mr. Boone now," Hannah said. "I was wondering if you'd like to work on your letters and reading. Every child should have that chance." Ephraim shifted uncomfortably. "Don't want to be any trouble." "It's no trouble," Hannah assured him. "In fact, why don't you both come for Sunday supper? We can discuss it properly." Something in her steady gaze made it hard to refuse. An hour later, they sat in Hannah's small but tidy kitchen, warm with the smell of beef stew and fresh bread. Nora helped set the table, chattering about the books she spotted on Hannah's shelves. "Mama taught me some letters," she explained proudly. "I can write my name." "That's wonderful," Hannah said, ladling stew into bowls. "We'll start from there." Ephraim watched them, something easing in his chest. Hannah had a way about her that reminded him of his Sarah, practical but kind, strong but gentle. When she laughed at Nora's stories, the sound seemed to brighten the whole room. The afternoon passed easily, winter light softening through Hannah's curtains. She showed Nora her school books, while Ephraim helped clear the dishes. Their quiet conversation, comfortable as old friends. "You're doing right by her," Hannah said softly as they worked. "She's a special child." Ephraim nodded, unable to find words for the weight of responsibility he felt. As dusk approached, they bundled up for the walk home. The setting sun painted the snow in shades of rose and gold, their boots crunching in perfect silence. Halfway up the trail, Nora's small hand slipped into Ephraim's. "Thank you, Pa," she said quietly. Ephraim's throat tightened suddenly, his heart squeezing at the simple word. He curled his rough fingers around her tiny ones. Unable to speak past the emotion that threatened to overwhelm him, they walked on through the gathering darkness. 3 sets of footprints marking their path home. His large ones, Nora's small ones, and Hannah's neat prints beside them. Above, the first stars began to shine, bright as promise in the clear mountain sky. The morning sun filtered through frost-touched windows as Ephraim showed Nora how to split kindling. His large hands guided her small ones on the hatchet handle, teaching her to strike the wood at just the right angle. "Like this?" Nora asked, her tongue poking out in concentration as she tapped at a thin piece of pine. "That's right," Ephraim nodded, pride warming his voice. "Gentle now. Let the weight of the head do the work." The kindling split with a satisfying crack. Nora beamed up at him, her face glowing with accomplishment. "I did it." "Sure did. Reckon you'll be running this place before long," Ephraim said, ruffling her hair. Their days fell into a pleasant routine. Nora learned to milk the goats, her tiny hands working carefully at their udders while she sang to keep them calm. She stirred the iron pot of stew, standing on a wooden box to reach. Adding pinches of salt, just as Ephraim showed her, Hannah began visiting 3 afternoons a week, carrying primers and a small slate with chalk. She sat with Nora at the rough-hewn table, patiently guiding her through letters and simple words. Bior, Nora sounded out carefully, chalk scratching against slate. Very good. Hannah praised. Now try writing. Cat Ephraim pretended to busy himself with mending harness, but his eyes kept straying to the lesson. Hannah caught him watching once and smiled knowingly. "Would you like to join us, Mr. Boone?" He shook his head, embarrassed. Got work to tend to, but he stayed within earshot, secretly mouthing the letters. Along with Nora's recitations, the change in Ephraim didn't go unnoticed in town. Where once he'd grunt and hurry through his business, now he'd pause to exchange pleasantries. Nora's small presence softening his rough edges. Mrs. Peterson, at the general store, even caught him, smiling when Nora pointed out a peppermint. "Stick in the candy jar. Reckon one won't hurt," he'd said, counting out pennies while Nora clutched her treasure. But not everyone viewed these changes with approval. One afternoon at the blacksmith's, while waiting for his mule to be reshod, Ephraim overheard 3 men talking in low voices by the forge. "Railroads? Got plans for that valley land," one muttered. "Water rights alone are worth a fortune." "Ain't natural, him keeping that girl out there," another added. "Man living alone suddenly takes in an orphan with valuable property. Makes you wonder, probably just waiting to sell off her claim to the highest bidder." The third agreed. Ephraim's hands clenched into fists, but he forced himself to stay silent. Starting a fight would only prove their poor opinions of him. Still, their words burned in his gut all the way home that evening. After a simple supper of beans and cornbread, Ephraim sat in his chair by the fire while Nora practiced her letters. The lamp cast warm shadows on the cabin walls, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. Nora's voice was small, but clear in the quiet room. Ephraim looked up from his whittling. "Will I stay here with you forever?" The knife stilled in his hands. Through the window, he could see stars pricking through the darkening sky, bright and distant as promises. He thought of the men's words at the blacksmith's, of the railroad's plans, of all the forces that might try to separate them. "Can't promise forever," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "But I'll keep you safe as long as I can. But I'll keep you safe as long as I can." Nora nodded, seeming to understand what he couldn't fully express. She went back to her slate, carefully forming letters in the lamplight. While Ephraim watched her with a heart both full and heavy with responsibility, the fire crackled low in the stove. And outside, snow began to fall, each flake catching starlight as it drifted past the window. Inside the cabin, father and daughter sat in comfortable silence, their shadows dancing together on the wall like they'd always belonged there. While the world's threats gathered like storm clouds on the horizon, December brought deep snow to the mountains, blanketing Ephraim's cabin in pristine white. The cold morning air bit sharp as he hitched the mule to the small sledge he'd fashioned from old boards. Nora bounced on her toes beside him, clutching her slate wrapped in a wool scarf. "We don't want to be late for the Christmas rehearsal," she said, her breath making little clouds in the frosty air. "Reckon not," Ephraim replied, lifting her onto the sledge and tucking a buffalo robe around her legs. The ride to town would take an hour through the drifted snow. The one-room schoolhouse glowed with warmth when they arrived. Children's voices spilled through the windows, practicing carols for the upcoming Christmas Eve service. Hannah stood at the door, greeting each arrival with a bright smile that lingered when she saw Ephraim and Nora. "Welcome. We're so glad you could join us," she said, helping Nora with her coat buttons. Her fingers brushed Ephraim's arm as she reached for the heavy garment, sending an unexpected warmth through him. Inside, pine boughs decorated the walls, their fresh scent mixing with wood smoke from the pot-bellied stove. 24 children sat in rows, some fidgeting, others studying small cards with their assigned scripture verses. Hannah guided Nora to a seat near the front. "I've chosen a special verse for you," she said, handing Nora a carefully printed card. Luke chapter 2, verse 14. Ephraim settled onto a bench at the back, watching as Nora mouthed the words silently, "Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, goodwill toward men. The children took turns practicing their pieces. Some spoke too fast, others too quiet, but Hannah encouraged each one with gentle patience. When it was Nora's turn, she stood straight and clear, her voice carrying to the rafters without trembling. Ephraim's chest tightened with pride. He caught Hannah watching him, her eyes soft with understanding. Something stirred in his heart then, a feeling he'd thought long buried with his Sarah. He looked away quickly. Unsettled by its presence, the rehearsal ended with all the children singing Silent Night. Their young voices filled the schoolhouse with a pure, sweet sound that brought moisture to Ephraim's eyes. He blinked hard, remembering Sarah singing that very hymn as she decorated their first Christmas tree together. That evening, back at the cabin, Nora helped him hang pine branches over the mantel. The fire crackled warm and bright as she practiced her verse again, then settled into her favorite spot by the hearth. "Mama taught me another Christmas song," she said softly. "Would you like to hear it?" Ephraim nodded, not trusting his voice. Nora began to sing "O Come," all the faithful in her clear child's soprano. The familiar melody pierced him like an arrow. It had been Sarah's favorite hymn, the one she'd sung every Christmas morning as she made cinnamon bread. The walls of the cabin seemed to close in. Without a word, Ephraim stepped outside into the starlit night. The cold air burned his lungs as he stared up at the vast sky, tears freezing on his cheeks. Grief and gratitude warred in his heart. Sarah was gone, leaving a hole nothing could fill. Yet here was this child, bringing light back into his darkness, one small flame at a time. She'd awakened something he'd thought forever, dead a sense of purpose, a reason to look forward to each dawn. The cabin door creaked. Small boots crunched in the snow behind him. "Are you sad?" Nora's voice was barely a whisper. Ephraim knelt and gathered her close. "Not sad, exactly. Just remembering someone who used to sing that song, your wife." "Yes," he cleared his throat. "Sarah was her name. She would have loved you something fierce." Nora hugged him tight. "Maybe she sent me to you." Ephraim's heart squeezed at her simple faith. Maybe she did at that. They stood together under the stars for a long moment before the cold drove them back inside. That night, after Nora was asleep, Ephraim sat long by the fire, watching the flames dance and letting memories wash over him without their usual sting. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Ephraim rose early, pulled on his boots, and went out to the woodpile. The rhythmic swing of the axe felt good, purposeful. As he worked, a tune rose unbidden to his lips. "O Come, all the faithful," hummed, soft, and a bit off-key. He couldn't remember the last time he'd hummed anything. The sound of his own voice making music, however rough, felt like a key turning in a long rusted lock. Something was opening in him, slow but sure as spring after winter. The woodpile grew as the morning lengthened, more than they'd need for days. Each log he split felt like an offering of thanks for Nora, for Hannah's kindness, for the way hope had crept back into his life when he least expected it. Christmas Eve settled over the mountain town like a soft blanket of peace. Fresh snow sparkled under the glow of coal oil lanterns that lined the path to the white-steeped church. Ephraim adjusted his freshly pressed shirt, collar-stiff and uncomfortable, but proper for the occasion as he helped Nora from the sledge. She twirled in her new dress. A carefully mended hand made down from Hannah's trunk. The schoolteacher had spent evenings adding lace at the collar and letting out the hem, transforming the faded calico into something special. A red ribbon, another of Hannah's gifts, kept Nora's dark curls neat. "You look right pretty," Ephraim said gruffly, his throat tight with emotion. The church windows blazed with candlelight, and the sweet scent of pine boughs wrapped around the porch posts. Inside, the small sanctuary hummed with excitement as families filled the wooden pews. Children fidgeted in their Sunday best, clutching small paper bags of peppermint candy. Hannah met them at the door, her cheeks pink from the cold. "There's my star pupil," she said, straightening Nora's ribbon. Her fingers lingered near Ephraim's arm as she guided them to a pew near the front. The service began with familiar carols. Ephraim found himself singing along softly, surprising himself. One by one, the children stepped forward to recite their verses. Some stumbled, others rushed, but each received warm applause from the congregation. When Nora's turn came, she stood straight and tall before the altar. Her clear voice rang out. "He setteth the solitary in families. He bringeth out those which are bound with chains. The word seemed chosen especially for them, and a murmur of approval rippled through the church. Several women dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. Pride swelled in Ephraim's chest until he could hardly breathe. He caught Hannah's eye across Nora's empty seat, saw his own joy mirrored there. This child, once abandoned at a train station, now stood confident and loved before her community. After the final hymn and blessing, Hannah joined them for the ride back to the cabin. Nora sat between them on the sledge, chattering about the service and the peppermint stick in her pocket. The night air sparkled with frost, and above them, stars scattered like diamond dust across the velvet sky. The cabin glowed welcome when they arrived, smoke curling from the chimney where Ephraim had banked the fire before they left. Inside, pine boughs decorated the mantel, and 3 stockings hung below Hannah's contribution to their Christmas preparations. While Ephraim built up the fire, Hannah heated milk for cocoa on the wood stove, adding a precious spoonful of sugar to each tin cup. The rich aroma filled the small space as they gathered close to the hearth. "Shall we sing some more carols?" Hannah suggested, and Nora clapped in delight. Their voices blended in the familiar tunes. "Silent Night," "The First Noel," "O Little Town of Bethlehem." Even Ephraim joined in, his deep bass adding foundation to Hannah's sweet soprano and Nora's pure high notes. Between songs, they shared stories of Christmases past. Hannah spoke of Swedish traditions from her childhood Santa Lucia, with her crown of candles, sweet saffron buns. Nora remembered her mother's paper chains and popcorn strings. Ephraim, after some coaxing, told of the Christmas when Sarah surprised him with his favorite maple candy hidden in his boots. The evening grew late. Hannah led them in a simple prayer of gratitude, their hands linked in the firelight. Nora's head began to droop, and she curled up on her little cot near the hearth, still clutching her peppermint stick. Ephraim watched her sleeping face in the dying firelight. Something profound had shifted in his heart. This wasn't just shelter he was providing anymore. They had become a true family. Hannah's quiet presence beside him felt right, necessary, as if she'd always been meant to share these moments. She's the best Christmas gift I never thought to ask for. Hannah's hand found his in the shadows. "You're a gift to her, too, Ephraim. We all are to each other." Outside the cabin's warm circle of light and love, 3 riders sat their horses in the deep shadows of the pine grove, their breath frosted in the bitter night air as they watched the scene through the glowing window. Railroad agent Silas Morton adjusted his hat brim lower against the cold. "We'll make our move tomorrow," but inside, unaware of the watching eyes. The little family savored their perfect moment of peace. Ephraim added another log to the fire, its crackling a counterpoint to Nora's soft breathing and the comfortable silence he shared with Hannah. For now, at least, all was calm. All was bright. The winter night wrapped the cabin in darkness, broken only by dying embers in the hearth. Ephraim dozed in his chair, at peace after the joy of Christmas Eve. Nora slept soundly on her cot, her new red ribbon still tied in her hair. The first crash against the door jolted him awake. Before he could reach his rifle, the door burst open with a spray of splinters. 3 men in heavy coats stormed inside, their boots thundering on the wooden floor. Railroad agent Silas Morton led them, a sheaf of papers clutched in his gloved hand. "By order of the court," Morton announced, his voice dripping with false authority, "we're here for the child." Ephraim lunged forward, but one of the men caught him with a punch to the jaw that sent him staggering. "You got no right," he roared. "We have every right." Morton waved the papers. Legal guardianship, signed and sealed. The girl's mother made arrangements before her death. Ephraim spat blood onto the floor. He knew Sarah May had done no such thing. Nora woke with a terrified cry. She scrambled from her cot, but Morton's men were faster. Ephraim fought like a wounded bear, his fists connecting with jaw and ribs. But they were younger, and there were 3 of them. A boot caught him in the ribs. Another blow split his lip. Through swelling eyes, he saw them grab Nora. "Please," she screamed, reaching for him. "Pa, help me." He pushed to his feet, only to meet Morton's pistol, but across his temple. The world exploded in stars and darkness. He heard Nora's screams fading as they dragged her into the night. Ephraim crawled toward the door, leaving a trail of blood on the floor. The cold hit him like a hammer as he stumbled outside. No sign of their horses remained, except churned snow and scattered hay. His vision swam. The last thing he saw was the stars wheeling overhead as he collapsed into a drift. Dawn painted the sky in bitter colors when Jim Wheeler, riding up to deliver Christmas breakfast, found Ephraim half frozen in the yard. "Mary, Mother of God," the old rancher whispered. He and his son loaded the unconscious man into their wagon. They took him straight to Hannah's small house behind the schoolhouse. She opened the door in her nightdress, gasped at the sight of Ephraim's battered face. "Bring him in, quickly." News spread through town as Hannah tended his wounds. Whispers passed between neighbors. The railroad men had taken the girl, shown papers to the sheriff, who turned away, rode out before first light. Fear kept mouths shut and doors closed. No one wanted to cross the Denver and Rio Grande. Ephraim lay on Hannah's narrow cot, his face a mass of purple bruises. She bathed his cuts with witch hazel, her hands gentle but trembling with anger. When he finally opened his eyes, they blazed with a fury that frightened her. "I'll kill them," he ground out through clenched teeth. "Every last one." "No." Hannah gripped his hand. "Violence won't bring her back. It won't help Nora." "Then what will?" His voice broke. "I promised to protect her. I promised we'll fight them proper," Hannah insisted, "with law and truth, not guns and vengeance. The papers must be forged. We can prove it." Ephraim tried to sit up, fell back with a groan. "They'll hurt her." That orphanage, his good eye filled with tears of rage and helplessness. "Listen to me." Hannah's voice was steel wrapped in silk. "I've sent word to my cousin in Denver. He's a lawyer. He'll help us expose Morton's scheme. But you have to heal first. I won't abandon her." The words came like a prayer through his swollen lips. "Whatever it takes, however long it takes, I'll get her back." Hannah pressed a cool cloth to his forehead. "We'll get her back together." She paused, then added softly, "She's my family too now." Outside the window, snow began to fall again, erasing the tracks of violence from the night before. But nothing could erase the emptiness in the cabin up the mountain, where a red hair ribbon lay forgotten by the cold hearth. Waiting for its owner's return, morning sunlight filtered through Hannah's lace curtains, casting delicate shadows across Ephraim's bruised face. He lay on her narrow bed, every breath a reminder of last night's beating. The tick of Hannah's mantel clock marked each moment Nora spent in railroad custody, each second stoking the fury in his heart. "I need my rifle," he muttered, trying to push himself upright. Pain shot through his ribs, forcing a grunt from his lips. Hannah pressed him back with gentle but firm hands. "You'll do no such thing." She adjusted the quilt around him, her eyes soft with concern. "Violence won't save Nora. It'll only land you in jail. Worse than what—" Ephraim's voice cracked. "Let them steal her. Let them win." "We fight with truth," Hannah insisted. She sat beside him, smoothing her skirts. God's light always reveals what's hidden in darkness. A knock at the door interrupted them. Hannah rose to answer it, returning with Sarah Wheeler, the general store owner's wife. The woman's round face was pinched with worry. "Morton's man just posted notice at the courthouse. They're presenting the girl tomorrow morning, claiming she's a ward of the railroad company now." She twisted her apron in nervous hands. "They're saying her mama signed papers before she died." Ephraim's good eye blazed. "That's a lie." "Sarah may never," he broke off, remembering something. "The bundle. Where's Nora's bundle?" Here, Hannah retrieved the ragged package from her shelf. "Jim brought it with you." Ephraim's fingers trembled as he untied the string. Inside lay Nora's few possessions: a worn dress, a wooden comb, her mother's faded shawl. At the bottom rested a Bible, its leather cover cracked and soft with age. "Her mama read this every night," he said softly. "Nora told me." Hannah sat beside him as he carefully opened the Bible. Its pages were dog-eared, marked with pressed flowers and handwritten notes. As they turned the pages, a folded paper slipped from between Psalms and Proverbs. The paper was fitty-looking, with a notary's seal clearly visible. Hannah held it to the light, reading aloud. "Sarah Elizabeth May, being of sound mind, do hereby declare my daughter Nora Elizabeth May's sole heir to all lands and claims held in my name." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "And do grant temporary guardianship of said child to the man who takes her in kindness, should death find me before journey's end." Ephraim's hands shook as he took the document. The date tides just 3 days before she died. She knew. Hannah whispered. She knew she might not make it, but she trusted God would send someone to care for Nora. She squeezed Ephraim's arm. She meant you. Sarah Wheeler clasped her hands. Lord's mercy. That proves Morton's papers are forged. We need witnesses, Hannah said, standing straighter. Someone who saw you take Nora from the station that night. The station master Ephraim recalled, and old Pete, who runs the telegram office, they both saw me take her in. I'll fetch them, Sarah offered, already heading for the door. And I'll send Jim Wheeler for Judge Parker. He needs to see this before tomorrow's hearing. After she left, silence fell. Ephraim traced the signature on the affidavit with a gentle finger. Sarah May knew what she was doing, he said quietly, protecting Nora's future, protecting the land. Hannah nodded. She was led by faith, just as you were led to that station that night. She touched the Bible reverently. God's timing is perfect. Even when we can't see the path ahead, I reckon so. Ephraim's voice was rough with emotion. But Nora's still out there, probably scared half to death. We've got to move fast, and we will. Hannah's tone was firm, but properly, legally. Morton and his railroad men won't escape justice this time. Ephraim closed his eyes, fighting back the rage that still burned in his chest. The memory of Nora's screams tore at him, but Hannah was right. Violence would only make things worse. They had truth on their side, now proof of guardianship, written in a dying mother's hand and sealed before God. Thank you, he said softly, meeting Hannah's gaze, for keeping me from doing something foolish. For keeping me from doing something foolish. She smiled, patting his hand. That's what family does. She stood, smoothing her apron. Now rest. Tomorrow, we face Morton in court. Tomorrow, we bring Nora home. Through the window, winter sunshine sparkled on fresh snow, like hope breaking through after the darkest night. The affidavit lay safe in Hannah's strongbox, waiting to reveal its truth to the world. And somewhere, in a cold railroad office, a little girl waited for rescue, not knowing that her mother's love and foresight had already paved the way home. Snow drifted in thick curtains as Ephraim and Hannah guided their horses down the mountain trail toward town. The affidavit lay secure in Hannah's satchel, wrapped carefully in oilcloth to protect it from the weather. Ephraim's bruised face ached in the cold, but determination drove him forward. Every hoofbeat brought him closer to making things right for Nora. The late afternoon sun struggled through heavy clouds, casting weak shadows across the fresh snow. Hannah rode close beside him, her breath visible in the winter air. Neither spoke much, both lost in prayer and preparation for tomorrow's confrontation. As they approached the edge of town, a figure on horseback emerged from a stand of pine trees. Ephraim tensed, his hand moving toward his belt, but Hannah touched his arm gently. It's Henry, she said softly, the Comanche scout. The rider approached slowly, showing empty hands in greeting. Henry sat tall in his saddle, his dark eyes taking in Ephraim's injuries. He wore a mixture of native dress and frontier clothing, with a U.S. Army Scouts badge pinned to his wool coat. I heard about what happened, Henry said, his voice steady and clear. The railroad men who took the child. Ephraim nodded stiffly, uncertain of the scout's intentions. Henry was known for his tracking skills and fair dealings, but many in town still viewed him with suspicion. I've watched you these past weeks, Henry continued, guiding his horse alongside theirs. Seen how you care for the little one. Not many would take in a stranger's child, especially in these mountains. She needed help, Ephraim said simply. Henry's eyes softened with understanding. Like you helped my sister's boy last summer when he was hurt on the trail. You didn't ask questions then either, just gave aid. Ephraim remembered that day, finding the injured boy, treating his wounds, sharing food and shelter until his family could come. It hadn't seemed remarkable at the time. Tomorrow at the hearing, Henry said, I will speak, tell what I have seen of your character. You stood for a child when no one else would. He straightened in his saddle. I will stand with you. Hannah smiled warmly. Thank you, Henry. Your words will carry weight. The truth carries its own weight, Henry replied. I have seen too many promises broken, too many children taken from their people. This time, perhaps, we can stop it. Together, the three riders made their way into town. The streets were nearly empty, with most folks driven inside by the weather. Those few who were out hurried past, avoiding their eyes. News of tomorrow's hearing had spread, and people were choosing sides. At the boarding house, Mrs. Peterson welcomed them with hot coffee and concerned clucking over Ephraim's injuries. She led them to a small parlor where a fire blazed welcomingly. "Rest while you can," she advised, bringing extra blankets. "Tomorrow will be a long day." As evening deepened into night, more snow fell. Through the boarding house windows, Ephraim watched railroad agent Morton move from business to business along the street. The man's fine coat gleamed under the lamplight as he distributed what could only be money. "Speaking earnestly to influential townspeople, he's buying support," Hannah observed grimly, setting down her coffee cup. "Trying to turn folks against us before the hearing." "Money talks loud," Ephraim agreed, "but truth talks louder, if folks will listen." Henry, who had stayed to help plan their testimony, nodded. "Some will listen, others will take Morton's silver, but they cannot change what is right." As the evening wore on, Hannah drew out her Bible. The three gathered close to the fire, and she read psalms of justice and deliverance. Her clear voice gave strength to the words, filling the small room with hope. When she finished reading, Ephraim bowed his head. For the first time in years, he prayed aloud, his voice rough with emotion. "Lord, give us courage for tomorrow. Help us bring Nora home." And he hesitated, then continued, "Help me trust in your timing, not my anger." "Amen," Hannah whispered. Squeezing his hand, Henry added his own prayer in Comanche, then translated softly, "May the path be clear, and may those who would harm the innocent find no shelter in darkness." Outside, the snow continued falling, covering the town in clean white, but underneath that peaceful blanket, tension coiled tight as a spring. Tomorrow would bring either justice or heartbreak, and everyone knew it. Morton's money worked its poison in the shadows, while in the warmth of the boarding house parlor, three unlikely allies prepared to stand for truth. Henry rose to leave, wrapping his scarf against the cold. At the door, he turned back. "At dawn, then," he said simply, "we will speak what must be spoken." Ephraim nodded, grateful beyond words for this unexpected support. Together, they would face whatever the morning might bring. Dawn broke cold and clear over the county courthouse. Ephraim straightened his borrowed tie, fighting down the urge to tug at the unfamiliar constraint. Hannah had insisted he look respectable, and he knew she was right. Through the frost-etched windows, he could see townsfolk filing in. Drawn by the promise of drama, the courtroom filled quickly. Wooden benches creaked under the weight of spectators bundled in their winter finest. At the front, railroad agent Morton sat smugly beside his lawyer, a stack of papers arranged before them. Ephraim's heart clenched when he spotted Nora, small and pale in a new dress, seated near the railroad men. She caught his eye, and her lower lip trembled. Judge Harrison entered, his black robes sweeping as he took his seat. The room fell silent. Morton's lawyer rose first, presenting their case with practiced smoothness. He flourished documents bearing official-looking seals. "Your Honor," the lawyer declared, "we present properly executed guardianship papers for the child Nora May. The Denver and Rio Grande Railroad stands ready to ensure her proper care and education." He paused dramatically. Unlike the questionable arrangements made by this mountain recluse, whispers rustled through the crowd. Morton smirked, certain of victory. The lawyer continued, painting Ephraim as a dangerous hermit, unfit for raising a child. Living alone in a crude cabin, no proper schooling. No church attendance until recently. Ephraim gripped the rail before him, knuckles white. Hannah touched his arm gently, steadying him. When the judge called him forward, Ephraim rose slowly. He felt every eye in the room studying him. Double quotes Mr. Boone. Judge Harrison said, "What do you have to say in this matter?" Ephraim cleared his throat. He wasn't used to speaking before crowds, but Nora's future hung on his words. "Your Honor, I ain't much for fancy speech, but I'll tell you plain what happened." His voice strengthened as he described finding Nora alone at the station, seeing her need, and choosing to help. "I didn't plan on keeping her," he admitted, "thought to take her to the orphanage. But when I saw how they treated children there," he shook his head. "I couldn't leave her to that. So I took her home, fed her, kept her warm and safe." Hannah stepped forward then, holding out Nora's mother's Bible. Ephraim carefully extracted the folded paper within. Found this in her mama's Bible. "Your Honor, reckon it might matter to your decision." The courthouse held its breath as the judge examined the affidavit. Morton's face darkened as Judge Harrison read aloud, being of sound mind. I, Sarah May, do hereby name my daughter Nora May sole heir to my land claim, and grant temporary guardianship to the man who takes her in kindness." Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Morton's lawyer jumped up, sputtering objections. But the judge silenced him with a raised hand. "The document appears genuine," Judge Harrison noted, "properly witnessed and dated." He peered at Ephraim over his spectacles. "But character matters in these cases. Who can speak to Mr. Boone's fitness as guardian?" Hannah stepped forward first. "I'm the school teacher here, Your Honor. I've seen how Ephraim cares for Nora. He brings her to lessons, makes sure she has warm clothes and good food. She's thriving in his care." Old Tom Jenkins, the storekeeper, raised his hand. "Next." "Been knowing Ephraim 15 years, Judge. His honest as daylight. Pays his debts, helps folks in need. Never known him to do wrong by anyone." More voices joined. In Mrs. Peterson from the boarding house spoke of Ephraim's gentleness with Nora. The Reverend praised his recent return to church. Each testimony built upon the last, painting a picture of a man transformed by love for a child. Then Henry rose, his quiet dignity drawing all eyes. "I am a Comanche scout," he began. "I have watched this man, seen how he treats those different from himself. When my sister's son was hurt, Ephraim helped without question. When this child needed shelter, he gave it. He is a man of honor. He gave it. He is a man of honor." Morton's face had grown steadily redder during the testimonies. Now he leaped up, waving papers. "Your Honor, these people are simple folk, easily swayed. Our documents, your documents," Judge Harrison interrupted, "appear to have irregularities." He held one up to the light, including different inks used on the same date. His stern gaze swept the courtroom. "This court takes a very dim view of forgery, Agent Morton." The railroad man collapsed back into his seat, ashen-faced. Nora, watching it all with wide eyes, began to smile. Hopefully. Judge Harrison's gavel crashed down with finality, the sharp crack silencing the packed courtroom. Having reviewed all evidence and testimony, he declared, his voice carrying to every corner, "This court finds in favor of Mr. Ephraim Boone. He shall retain full guardianship of Nora May until she comes of age, with all rights and responsibilities thereof." The gavel struck again. "Furthermore, the railroad's claim to the May property is dismissed, and I am referring these forged documents to the district attorney for investigation." The tension that had gripped the room snapped like ice in spring thaw. Cheers erupted from the wooden benches, echoing off the high ceiling. Townsfolk jumped to their feet, clapping and embracing. Even old Tom Jenkins wiped tears from his weathered cheeks with a red bandana. Railroad Agent Morton slumped in his chair, his face ashen as his schemes crumbled. His lawyer gathered their discredited papers with trembling hands, avoiding everyone's eyes as they slunk toward the door. But Ephraim noticed none of this, his attention fixed solely on Nora, who had broken free from her minders. She ran down the center aisle, her arms outstretched, tears streaming down her face. "Pa!" she cried. Pa Ephraim dropped to one knee, catching her as she flew into his arms. He pressed his face into her hair, his own tears falling freely now. All his careful barriers, built up over years of loneliness, dissolved in that moment of pure joy. Nora's small fingers clutched at his coat as she sobbed with relief, and he held her tighter, whispering, "It's all right now, little one. You're home. You're home for good." A warm hand touched his shoulder. He looked up to find Hannah standing beside them, her eyes shining with happiness. She squeezed his shoulder, and without thinking, he reached up to clasp her hand. The three of them formed a tableau of newfound family, witnessed by the whole town. Outside, the church bells began to peal, ringing out the news across the snow-covered valley. The sound drew them all out onto the courthouse steps. Fat snowflakes drifted down from pearl-gray skies, catching in Nora's eyelashes and decorating Hannah's dark hair like stars. The townspeople surrounded them, offering congratulations and backs. Henry stepped forward to shake Ephraim's hand, a rare smile crossing his face. "You fought with honor," he said simply, "and justice was done." Walking through the jubilant crowd toward home, Ephraim felt something shift deep in his soul. Nora skipped beside him, one hand in the other holding Hannah's. The bitter cold that had gripped his heart for so many years melted away, replaced by a warmth he'd thought forever lost. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Ephraim smiled fully, openly, letting his joy show plain on his face. The walls he'd built around himself had crumbled, but in their place stood something far stronger, the foundations of a family, built on love and trust. The cabin glowed like a beacon against the darkening mountain sky. Ephraim pushed open the heavy wooden door, carrying an armload of split logs. The familiar creak of floorboards welcomed them home as Hannah helped Nora shake snow from her coat and boots. Ephraim knelt at the stone hearth, carefully arranging kindling beneath the logs. Within moments, flames danced upward, casting warm shadows across the walls. The iron stove still held coals from morning, and soon its steady heat filled the single room. Hannah lit the brass lamp on the table, its gentle light softening the cabin's rough-hewn corners. The glass chimney gleamed like a star brought down to earth. Nora watched, heavy-eyed, as the flames steadied and grew bright. "Time for bed, little one," Hannah said softly, helping Nora change into her nightgown. The girl climbed onto her cot, now adorned with Hannah's quilted blanket and a small rag doll the teacher had given her. "Come with me," Nora whispered, reaching for Ephraim's weathered hand. Her small fingers wrapped around his calloused palm, holding tight as her eyes began to flutter. He sat beside her, watching as sleep slowly claimed her. The prayers she'd taught him echoed in his mind, a gift he'd never expected to receive. When her breathing deepened into peaceful slumber, Ephraim carefully withdrew his hand and tucked the quilt around her shoulders. Hannah smiled at the tenderness in his movements, so different from the gruff mountain man who'd first brought a lost child home. "Shall we step outside?" Hannah whispered, gesturing toward the door. Ephraim nodded, following her onto the porch. The night spread vast and clear above them, countless stars piercing the darkness like diamonds scattered across black velvet. The air held that crystal stillness unique to mountain winters, where every breath felt like a prayer. Ephraim gazed at his cabin, seeing it through new eyes. No longer just a shelter from the world's harshness, it had become something more precious, a home. Through the window, lamplight spilled golden across Nora's sleeping form. The walls that had once echoed with his solitude now rang with laughter, hymns, and the quiet joy of shared meals. Looking up at the star-filled sky, Ephraim felt gratitude well up from deep within. For the first time in years, words of thanks came easily to his lips. "Lord," he said quietly, "I reckon I wasn't looking for second chances, but you sent them anyway, through a child's trust, through faithful hearts." Through the courage to choose right over easy, Hannah leaned against him then, her presence warm and steady as the lamplight that glowed behind them. Together they stood in comfortable silence, watching their breath mist in the cold air. While inside, their newfound daughter slept peacefully. Safe at last. If you believe stories can heal, lift, and connect us, this channel is for you. Thanks for being here. Hit subscribe, and I'll meet you again tomorrow with something real.